But when a legitimate scientist, like the NASA director, expresses his thought about global warming, very little attention is paid to what he said. Instead, media focus is on the backlash from the global warming advocates from all sides, and he has to apologize for being frank. This led him to conclude that global warming is now treated like a religion, not to be criticized. Which brings me to the point about the consensus in the scientific community that Al Gore claimed in the movie. There are legitimate scientists who have alternative explanations for explaining the global warming being observed, but their views are often not given exposure. They are often demonized as being paid for by the oil industry or part of a right-wing conspiracy who oppose any form of regulation by government. And I have to make a disclaimer that my study was paid for by University of the Philippines and no one else. Which brings me to the last part of my talk. This is about doing the right thing for the right reason. And this involves changing maps and bridging gaps, which I will return to later. There are 12 most serious environmental problems that we need to address, of which climate change is but one among these. These were identified in Jared Diamond's book entitled Collapse. This includes the destruction and conversion of forests, oceans, and freshwater systems, the overharvesting of wild food, particular fisheries, and the loss of biodiversity. We tend to forget what we have been taught as early as our primary schooling. The water cycle. We memorize this but has not applied this in real life. Whenever droughts and floods occur, which happen almost like clockwork now in our country, nobody remembers the water cycle. When the forest is lost, the cycle is broken. Water is not retained, and rain cascades as floods to the lowlands during the rainy season. And no water is released during the dry months, since the storage tank that was supposed to store this, the forest, has been destroyed. Climate change will exacerbate this alternating condition of drought and floods, but not cause it. And this is what is left of our forests, mapped around the end of the 20th century. As you can see, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was about 70% forest cover. By the end, we were down to about last 18%. No new maps had been produced, except for an attempt by the DNR in 2003 to estimate forest cover in the country using 2002 satellite imagery. The DNR results showed an increase of about 2 million hectares, but some sectors are critical of this estimate, as these include areas that are not formally forests in the previous estimates, but were included in this assessment due to the change in definition, which now includes coconut trees, mango trees, and other horticultural crops. Again, the alarms are raised about the expected loss of water due to the loss of forests, but is anybody paying attention? Furthermore, the development priority of the GMA government is further undermining this fragile ecosystem. This is the remaining forest, and these are the mining applications. These are three more of the problems Diamond identified. Most important to note and remember here, and is relevant, is that further fossil fuel extraction will be deeper underground, dirtier, increasingly expensive to extract or process, or involve higher environmental costs. The time when the price of oil per barrel will shoot up to $200 per barrel has been predicted by the same group that predicted that a barrel of oil will cost $100 now, when it was about $50. And in the Philippines, the day of 100 peso per liter of gasoline is very near. The last 6 environmental issues that Diamond identified, among these last 6 environmental issues that Diamond identified, he distinguished between the impact of human presence and human numbers. When human population increases, it immediately leads to an increase in demand for food and shelter, which in turn impedes on natural systems and urban areas. To illustrate, if we assume that there are now about 90 million Filipinos with a family size of 5 members per household, if each household has 1 cell phone, and if each cell phone needs 5 watts to charge, then we would need 90 megawatts of electricity just to power cell phones alone. Think of the other electronic toys like iPad, MP3 players, laptops, etc. that need to be powered. Are we willing to give up on this permanently to reduce emissions? The 12 issues were discussed separately, but they are linked. One problem exacerbates another or makes its solution more difficult. As I've illustrated, human population expansion affects the 11 other problems. More people means more deforestation, more toxic chemicals, more demand for wild fish, more loss of biodiversity, and etc. As Dean De Dios mentioned in his lecture last week, if we were able to have a population growth rate similar to that of Thailand, we would now be rice exporters instead of being the world's biggest rice importer. Humankind is guilty of a lot of crimes against the earth, and pumping greenhouse gases is just one among many. If we are to ensure that the earth will continue to support life as we know it, we have to address all 12 environmental issues in a comprehensive and systematic manner. No sacred cows, no ifs, no buts. We have to change the map of the world, meaning our mindsets, attitudes, and practices. In the last decade or so, people have become more environmentally aware, but this awareness had not been translated into actions such as change in attitudes and practices. When traveling along EDSA, how many times have you experienced seeing hands popping out of cars in front of you, dumping plastic bags of Jollibee or McDonald's? But if you ask these people if they are environmentally aware and if they're concerned about the environment, they will most likely say yes. We also need to bridge gaps in humanity's mind. We have to have our aspirations coupled to protecting the environment and use this as goals and make sure that we have the passion to attain our aspirations and goals. On average, a species on Earth lives for about 1 million years before it becomes extinct. We only have hit the 20% mark of our existence. Will we ever survive to see the 1 million-year mark? Only when we realize that we save flurry and fluffy species and work to save Mother Earth, what we are actually doing is to save human species from extinction. While it would seem nice to think that we are doing something beyond ourselves, the reality is that we are doing conservation work for our own survival. Nothing altruistic about being a conservationist. As a consequence of doing the right thing, addressing these 12 issues, we will save humanity from itself and ease the pressure on the only living planet there is. As Dr. Ed Gomez discussed in his previous lecture about changing attitudes in the university, I would even bring this further and go beyond attitudes. I say, bridge gaps and change maps. Magandang hapon po sa lahat.
Can we now call on Dr. Alisa Alampay for the reaction?
Siguro, as a geologist, ang point of view ko kasi, I'm a student of Earth history, and so I have to start my reaction based on what I know and what I've studied for all these years. For one, climate change is not a new thing for us geologists. It's been happening, as Dr. Perry Ong has been saying, it's been happening in Earth history ever since. And the reason we know this is because rocks and fossils have always revealed themselves to us geologists and told us the story. There are many examples from Earth history where we once had a time where it was very, very cold. This was just before the Cambrian explosion that Dr. Perry Ong was talking about. And the reason for this very cold time, or ice house Earth, next slide please, was because of what he also has been mentioning, changes in the distribution of land masses, which affects the reflectivity of the surface, or what we call as albedo. So when you have more land masses gathered together near the equator, you have more reflectance, reflectivity of the surface, and so you have colder times. At other times also, during the Cretaceous, this is the most recent time when we had the greatest greenhouse warming in Earth history, where even the geologists actually devote themselves to the study of the Cretaceous to understand if global warming is indeed happening today, what would be the end point of that global warming event, because this is one of the, as far as we know, one of the worst global warming events in Earth history. Next, please. So let's just try to concentrate, let's try to situate ourselves in Earth history in terms of the global warming that we're supposedly experiencing today. And so let's look at the last 65 million years. It's very strange to see a graph like this showing that it actually is cooling. From 65 million years to today, the trend has been a cooling trend. We are from the time of the dinosaurs, when they disappeared from the fossil record 65 million years ago, to today, it's always been a cooling trend. Next, please. But the reason for this cooling trend is because of plate tectonics again, the opening of oceanic gateways, and isolation of the Antarctic and the Arctic oceans, creating colder polar regions. Next, please. Let's look at the next graph of the last 1 million years. This is a record both from Delta O18 of foraminifera, or microfossils from marine sediments, and also it was also seen in astronomical observations, the Milankovitch cycles that Dr. Perry Ong was mentioning. And over here in the last 1 million years, within that cold period, we have these so-called ice ages where you have interglacial and glacial cycles creating a sawtooth pattern. We are at that arrow at the very end, at an interglacial right now. It's a warm time in the cold time of Earth history. So let's focus again on the next slide. This is the Milankovitch cycles, which Dr. Ong has already discussed. Next, please. So this is where, to some extent, Dr. Ong and I differ, in the sense that I believe that global warming is indeed